It's time for the Tactics Meeting. Episode 18, Shoreline Response is Not Just SCAT, with Dr. Ed Owens of Owens Coastal Consulting. I'm your Planning Section Chief, Dan Smiley, and I'll be your host as we talk to subject matter experts about response tactics and technology. But before we start, I want to tell you about an exciting webinar that's being presented by the Pacific States British Columbia Oil Spill Task Force. It's on lessons learned from virtual drills and prevention efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's being held on June 30th from 10:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I'll be presenting on the future of virtual command posts and hope that you can join us on Zoom. The fact that this is a virtual event should give you some idea of what the future may bring. For a meeting link, go to oilspilltaskforce.org and click on Events. Dr. Ed Owens of Owens Coastal Consultants, welcome to the program.
Hello, Dan. Hope you're doing well.
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm very excited to have you here. I spend a lot of time in response and exercises, and in exercises in particular, we have a tendency to say that SCAT is out of play. Shoreline cleanup assessment techniques are out of play. And this is one of those areas of oil spill response that I feel really uneducated about. It's one of those things that I know has to happen, but we set it off to the side as if it's kind of a mystical thing. Getting the SCAT teams a bit like locating a unicorn. So I'm hoping that you can help fill in the gaps for me and tell me what is important. And if we could start off by backing up a little bit and tell us really a little bit about who you are and how you managed to get into oil spill response in the first place.
Well, it wasn't voluntary. As is, I think, the case for many people. I was a young scientist. I'd done most of my work as a physical geographer, geologist, was working on shorelines, working on beaches. And I had started a job with the Canadian Hydrographic Service in Ottawa as a marine geologist. And I'd only been there about 6 months when what was in those days referred to as a leaky greekie.
A leaky greekie?
Yeah, the old coastal tankers that used to ply the coastal zone, and a lot of them were Greek-owned and were a bit rusty around the edges. And this particular ship, the Arrow, had already had a couple of incidents, and it sailed into Chedabucto Bay without really a full set of nav aids, and managed to hit a rock. And this was 1970, so we just had the Santa Barbara blowout. It had the Torrey Canyon, and all of a sudden people became aware of oil spills. And my boss, who was the Dominion hydrographer, said, "You know all about shorelines, why don't you go down there and see if you can help them out?" So I flew to Nova Scotia and Chedabucto Bay, and I worked on mapping the oil shorelines and giving shoreline cleanup recommendations to the operations folks. I've got to say that I didn't know anything about oil spills or shoreline cleanup in 1970, but then nor did anybody else.
So you could hardly go wrong.
Well, you could. We made a few mistakes and learned very quickly not to use a lot of bulldozers to take away beach material. And then the next spill comes along in Canada, and they say, "Oh, well, you know more about this than anybody else." Well, that's not a big compliment. And I managed to continue a career as a scientist, university scientist, but the spills just kept happening from time to time. And in the end, I gave up trying to have two lives and became a consultant way back in 1979. And basically from that point on, shorelines and oil spills have been my predominant activity. And 89, along comes Exxon Valdez. That took 3 years out of my life. And again, then Deepwater Horizon, that took another 3 years out of my life. But, and I'm not saying negatively, but they're a big commitment, because the shoreline response goes on for a long time after the spill.
I was at Deepwater Horizon. I arrived, I think, on about day 10, and I was in the offshore recovery group. And we were there really until just after the leak was stopped in September.
Right.
But you were there like another 3 years, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I mean, we took our toys and went home.
Well, that, and this is part of the issue that we're trying to address these days. One of the key lessons learned from Deepwater Horizon was to get a shoreline response program, which includes the shoreline surveys, the SCAT, to get them mobilized right at the beginning, at the same time that the on-water operations are taking place. We need to be actively mobilizing and implementing a shoreline response program. And we don't do that very often. We very often focus on the on-water activities. And then when they're winding down, resources then get shifted to the shoreline. And I don't just mean equipment, it's like management time is an important resource. And what we should be doing is looking for management time right at the very beginning. And Richard Santner with BP has this phrase called getting it right from the start. And if you can do that, then you can address shoreline oiling when the bulk oil has arrived, before it gets redistributed, before it is potentially buried. But while it's still in a bulk oil form, we can be the most effective. And then that reduces the overall size of the affected area, so it doesn't get redistributed by waves and currents. It reduces the length of the shoreline response program. So there's a huge incentive to get it right from the beginning and to implement a shoreline response program at the same time as we're working in the on-water theater as well. And I think that's a big message that we learned from Deepwater Horizon, and I think we've learned it several times now, but it's hard to implement because so often the incident command system focuses on setting up the on-water operations. And I think a lot of the focus that we have in preparedness, particularly in drills and exercises, we often don't play SCAT. We often don't play the shoreline response program, which means from a cultural viewpoint, it's not at the forefront of the minds of those who are mobilized on a real incident. So I'm personally a strong advocate of making sure in each drill and exercise that there is a component at the beginning. One of the initial incident objectives should be to assess the need for a shoreline response program. And if the shoreline is oiled, or if the shoreline is about to be oiled, then set up that shoreline response program right away. Get shoreline, the operations branch that deals with the shoreline, get them mobilized right away so that we can capture that bulk oil at the time when it's only just arrived on shore or as it is arriving on shore to be most effective.
Well, I'm not sure that we're setting the team up in the early stages in the correct way, because even when we mobilize OSRO resources and assign an on-water, or I mean a shoreline recovery group supervisor, we don't tend to mobilize for or SCAT and I think people like myself, who I'm going to find myself as the Wismic incident commander or the Gallagher incident commander, don't have a good view of what setting that up is. Although some of my other Gallagher folks, I think, very much do know. But you have to talk to me like I'm a third grader in this regard. So I came into this thinking we were just going to talk about SCAT, and it sounds like SCAT. And if you could take a minute to give us an hour good definition of SCAT, but it sounds like SCAT is really just a piece of a broader response that you've been referring to as shoreline cleanup.
That's right, Dan. SCAT's the obvious one, because SCAT is, we all very often say, is the eyes and the ears of the command post. I mean, the SCAT teams are in the field looking for the oil, describing the oil, making the recommendations for shoreline treatment. And that SCAT data is invaluable in terms of setting the strategy and the tactics for the shoreline response. SCAT sets the cadence for the shoreline response operation. But we very often think of SCAT as just being the field teams. You know, a responsible party representative, a state, federal, maybe a landowner, stakeholder, local community, First Nations representatives who go out and collect the data, and then it gets used in the planning section environmental unit. But it's more than that, because SCAT interacts with operations, both in the command post and in the field. Not only are we the eyes and the ears of the command post, bringing the information in, but we're also the link in the field. So that when in a 204 and the assignment list, when an assignment is developed, and we call those shoreline treatment recommendations, STRs. If we need to do a cleanup, SCAT will generate an STR, which is a description of what is recommended. It goes into the EU. It's looked at by the environmental group in terms of resources at risk, in terms of Endangered Species Act, National Historic Preservation Act, and good practices that would apply to that section of shoreline in the STR provide guidance and constraints on what operations does. And so that goes, this STR then goes into the tactics meeting, the planning meeting, gets into the incident action plan. And it's a work order. It's one of the tasks in the 204 that becomes a work order. So that piece of paper or electronic form goes to operations. And they're going to look at it and say, what's a plover? You know, we know what seagulls are, but we don't know what plovers are. And so one of the roles that SCAT has is in the field to work with the strike forces, or the task force leaders, and explain to them what is in that shoreline treatment recommendation. What is the intent of the shoreline treatment recommendations and the constraints, so that they can understand the messages that are coming from the environmental unit. Because there is, once a 204 is issued and assignments are given to operations, there is no formal support from that point onwards in the current ICS system. And so what we developed, and we developed this really on Deepwater Horizon, it became necessary because of the scale of the problem that we needed to have not just the SCAT teams. In fact, what happened in August of 2010 was there was a breakdown of communications. I mean, the size of the response. We were spread from the Texas border right into the Florida Panhandle, and it was assumed that the SCAT teams would be able to handle that. Well, They couldn't. Very often they weren't working in close proximity to the shoreline operations team. And the communications broke down. Operations felt they'd been not properly taken care of. And they didn't understand, because no one had taken the time to explain in the field, what some of these environmentally sensitive constraints meant, or what the cultural resource constraints meant. And we had a breakdown in Louisiana, and it was resolved by setting up something we called SCAT Ops Liaison. We added a layer. We added a layer that was assigned specifically to work in the field with the operations folks and to explain to them what needed to be done. That was a turning point.
So Ed, we did a lot of things in Deepwater Horizon for operational reasons, for political reasons, that were really a one-off that we wouldn't necessarily do again. Would you say that this SCAT Ops Liaison position that was created during Deepwater Horizon is a best practice worth emulating going forward?
I would indeed, Dan. That's it's a lesson that when we look back at other spills, both before and since Deepwater, that function has been there, but it hasn't been really defined. And so it's a bit of an ad hoc thing. The SCAT teams are, we'll drop by and have a chat with the with the field folks. Well, we can't get there for a week because we're working at the edge. We're still looking for we're looking at oil shorelines. We may not be in the same area. And so by giving that assignment a task, it becomes one of the SCAT assignments. We can fill that. We don't need to send a whole SCAT team out there. We can just have one or two people who act in that function. Now, it may not be needed every day or everywhere, but we should be aware that one of our responsibilities in the SCAT program is to support operations, to give them that understanding of what is the intent of the shoreline treatment recommendation. And it works the other way as well. That we learn in the field from operations how they're doing, what are the challenges they're facing, are there improvements that they see would benefit the program, and that can be taken back into the command post, and so we can adjust and tweak what we're doing as we go along. So it's a two-way conversation. It's like wearing two hats, wearing an operations hat who see things from the practical viewpoint, the feasibility, and the environmental viewpoint, which looks at what is the net environmental benefit, what is the the best spill impact mitigation things, the NEB and the SEMA. This provides that bridge, that link between what's going on in the command post and what's going on in the field. And so I do think it is something that, even if it's a part-time role for the SCAT team leads, it's definitely a function that should be identified and recognized.
So do we send these SCAT briefers to each division where they brief out? Do we provide this briefing or this education at the daily ops briefing? Do we do it when there's just a new STR? They might work off a single STR for a week or 2 weeks on a particular shoreline segment. So we do it when a new STR comes out. How do you see that taking place in a practical way?
Well, yeah, good point. I mean, we know every spill is different. On a smaller spill, the ops briefing may take place in the command post. Although a lot of the field guys don't like to go to the command post. It seems to be their nature to avoid it. So we go to them. But again, it's a scaling issue. You know, when SCAT surveyors are remote from operations activities, then that's where we need to inject a persons to act in that role. On smaller spills, it's a lot easier. We can generally manage multiple assignments without increasing the staff load. But as scale increases, and I mean, I look to things like Samandangayu in the Aleutians. I mean, 800 kilometers. I mean, the operations divisions were, you know, from Dutch all the way down the Aleutian chain. And there was an example where, although we didn't have a name for it, but SCAT Ops Liaison was definitely in play. And we assigned SCAT teams to, you know, work with next to operations until operations felt comfortable that they were implementing those good or best practices, and the SCAT team also felt comfortable that operations understood the intent of what was coming out of the environmental unit in the planning section. So it's always going to be different, but I think the key thing is recognition that it's a need to support operations.
So now we need another acronym. SCOPL?
No, I wouldn't do that. There's some people are still averse to the term SCAT. I just don't understand it.
Well, can you give us a definition of SCAT? I mean, we're it's really on the periphery now, but what is SCAT? How would you describe that process?
It's the documentation of shoreline oiling, going out there, detecting where the oil is, delineating the distribution of oil, and characterizing that oil, comparing that to the treatment targets. I mean, I don't like the word, clean up endpoints. I don't like the word clean up endpoint or the words, because cleanup assumes it's going to be clean afterwards. It rarely is. And endpoints implies closure. We sort of like to use the more politically correct terms like treatment targets for operations, which it won't stop people saying clean up endpoints, but the intent is that we are providing criteria for operational completion. And so the SCAT teams determine in the field whether or not a section of shoreline, an oiled zone, meets those criteria or doesn't meet them. If it doesn't meet them, then their responsibility is to recommend a shoreline treatment, the shoreline treatment recommendation form. And so SCAT has two functions. Detecting, delineating, describing, documenting the oil, but then also translating the intent of the command, which is what is going to be treated or cleaned and what's going to be left for natural recovery, because it's below those treatment criteria. So I don't think a lot of people actually know what SCAT does, because they do tend, you said at the beginning, they tend to be off on their own a little bit. Well, we are. We work on a different rhythm to the rest of the command. I mean, at the beginning, the cadence is basically ruled by the incident action plan, by the daily planning, the planning P, the planning cycle. That rules what goes on. But we often, the SCAT teams often don't get back that day until late afternoon, early evening sometimes, by which time the tactics and the planning for that next operational period have already been agreed and decided. And so it can be a couple of days sometimes before the SCAT process reaches the tactics meeting. And you mentioned an STR might go on for a week or several days or a week in some cases. And so the rhythm at which this series of recommendations are generated and implemented is not the same as the daily on water activities, which are planned for the start of the the next operating period the next morning. We tend to work on more of a rolling cadence rather than a daily cadence. And I think it does that, physically sets the shoreline response program a little bit out of whack with everybody else. And they tend to think that we're, and I've heard this before, oh, SCAT's out doing what they do. Well, yes, we are. But it doesn't mean to say that we're not an integral part of the whole system. But again, it's the rhythm is, they're not in the same, they're not synchronized at the same pace. And this tends to, I've seen people think that we're just a little bit arrogant. I've heard the word say, but it's not that. It's not that we are. It's just that we're not working in the same daily pattern as everybody else is. And that does set us apart. And it needs to be understood that it's not out of anything other than we're working on a different schedule.
Well, you've almost invented SCAT over the years. I mean, I think you have the right to be a little bit arrogant.
No, I don't want to. I mean, SCAT came about. I mean, I go back, when I start 1970, I've got maps of the distribution and concentration of oil on shorelines that I made in 1970. We've always done SCAT. We always have had to do SCAT. But in 1989, when we were faced with several thousands of kilometers of shoreline in Prince William Sound and the Gulf of Alaska, we needed to be systematic. We needed to take something which we'd been doing on an ad hoc basis into something which was well organized. And that was the shift from shoreline surveys to the shoreline cleanup assessment technique. I mean, we had 8 teams by May of 1989, we had 4 teams in Prince William Sound and 4 teams in the Gulf of Alaska. We didn't have GPSs, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have all the communications that we take for granted today. And so we had to set up a system. We had to be well organized. And so SCAT was born out of necessity. I mean, we knew how to map and we knew how to describe the shoreline oiling. Those two came together in what became a formal SCAT program. It was, we've been using forms for years. We just started using the same form for 8 different teams, working in different places. And then when they rotated out, they could calibrate the next team. And so all of a sudden we started to standardize the forms. We started to standardize the terminology. We had a computer, one laptop, which was a source of, had to pry it out of the budget a bit. We got one laptop. So we started generating a database on a computer. 1989, this was novel. This was all new stuff.
Yeah, you probably had like a 40 megabyte hard drive and the Pentium 1.
Right. And,
and a whopping gig of RAM, maybe, if you were lucky.
No, we had lots and lots and lots of hard drives. we ended up with about 4 computers that year. I mean, the GIS system that was used, it wasn't in place until September. Again, because this was the novelty of using computers. But we were forced to become systematic in order to be effective. And that's how SCAT was born. And, the acronym stuck, much to certain oil company attempts to change it to something perhaps less childish than something that has other meanings in other parts of the world. But
well, who came up with it? Who was the father of the term?
Well, I don't know who to pass the blame on to, because there were 2 of us. Friday night with not much to do. And in those days, things were very dry. You have to understand. Spills, the command post and the spill was pretty dry in terms of the social life. And we just started writing up acronyms on the wall. And you know how you sometimes do that. And we came up with this one, and it said SCAT, and somebody went, "Oh shit!" That's it. We got it. Because we were, you know, trying to be have a little levity, have a little humor in this. And so, I mean, the next day when we started calling it this, the command post was like open plan, you know, one of these open plan command posts. And the Exxon project manager, Otto Harrison, a very large, 6 foot something person, came down and asked if I would go for just a little chat with him. And we walked up and down the aisleways, and he had his arm around me, which was quite intimidating. He said, "You need to come up with another acronym." And I said, I'll work on it. Well, unfortunately, it was already out, and people started.
It's on your documents, and it was already.
It's on the, and so the next morning, Otto comes down. He says, "Hey, I'd like to have another word." And you can just see people going, "Oh, geez, he's going to have to take another one for the team." So I accept. Well, Fred Werenberg was the other chap who was in the room at the time, and he went on to work with FEMA. But it originated one Friday evening, just like that. So it has an origin. It wasn't an evolution as such, but it's stuck. And for whatever it's worth, I think it's funny still. I still get a chuckle of the story.
Well, it's the first time I've heard the story, so now everybody can get a chuckle out of it. So when we're putting these teams together, who do we pull onto these teams? I mean, we get a responsible party representative. I might call you, but who else is going to be on this team?
Well, there's a cadre that there's a lot of people that have SCAT experience, and so but believe it or not, on Deepwater Horizon there were at least 10 people from Exxon Valdez days that were on the SCAT teams in 2010. You know, there's a lot of experience out there, and there's obviously, you know, people have come up through the ranks, and there are people. There's I think it's important to recognize that the leadership of a SCAT team should probably come from the responsible party. Although there's a lot of agency folks are trained both at the federal and the state level, or the provincial level in Canada. One of the issues that has always come up is that there's typically a rotation that takes place with the government agencies, and very often after, you know, one has trained up or calibrated a regulatory agency individual, they get rotated out because many reasons are put forth. You know, we want to give more people experience. Boy, that person's had so much overtime. The other people in the group would like to get a bit of overtime too. I mean, there's many reasons, but the responsible party typically hires consultants such as myself and many others, because we provide consistency. We provide longevity that's calibrated, whereas the replacements that are very typical of the federal and the state agencies, they don't have that permanency which is necessary for a spill that goes on for, you know, very often a couple of 3 months or even longer. I mean, most spills of any size, Costco, Busan, you know, New Carissa, Selendang, Iowa, these are all 6 to 9 months or a year that went on, and you need to have that calibrated consistency. So
let's talk about Costco Busan for a second, because I was at Costco Busan, and I was there for like a week and a half.
Yeah,
I came with the skimming vessels.
right.
We did our on water thing. And then after that, there was no more oil on the water to recover, and we took our toys and we left.
Yeah.
How long were you there?
Well, what was it? November it started. I was there through September of that year, and then we went back again the following year. So that was 9 months. And I will add, we actually had SCAT Ops Liaison because we assigned a SCAT team. There were 4 operational divisions and 4 SCAT teams. And so one SCAT team was responsible for one division. And that built that relationship that was really important between the SCAT Environmental Unit Shoreline Program and the operations people in the field. But yeah, we were there. I mean, no, actually, yeah, I remember being there in September, and we were down to just about half a dozen oiled segments by that point. But that's, when I pack my go bag, it's not just what I need for the week, it's what I need for a month. Before I probably wouldn't be, my first rotation would probably be at the end of a month, by which time you'd have somebody trained to roll over there. My role would probably be the SCAT coordinator. I'm not so agile in the field with one eye these days. I tend to not work well on boulders and riprap as I used to. So, but
you put forward that Admiral Nelson vibe, which is very cool.
Well,
and you have plausible deniability. You can put that telescope to that eye. Darn hardy if I can see anything.
I will never admit to having done that several times. But yeah, it's you go in there knowing you're going to be there for a long, and this is where the responsible party, again, I think, needs to take the initiative at the very beginning, knowing that the shoreline response program is going to be there on anything other than a small spill. But at least 3, likely 6, and most possibly 9 months to a year. You've got to have that knowledge, that understanding from the very get-go. So when you set something up, it needs SCAT and the SRP, they need to have identity. They need to be on the first 202. They need to be on the incident objectives. We need to be on the organization list. We need to be on the organization chart. We need to be recognized. And I'm not trying to blow us up to be anything bigger than we are, but I don't think there is that recognition at the beginning of the importance and the longevity. As you say, you pack up your toys and go home.
Pack my toys and go home?
Yeah, we turn the lights out.
Well, I've got the incident management handbook in my hand and I don't see SCAT.
Let me just, I've got it flagged in mine. Well, it depends which one. I've got the Coast Guard one.
I got the Coast Guard 2014.
Yeah, I've got that one. On
Yeah.
page 20 dash, what is it? 20-28. There is a shoreline cleanup assessment technique coordinator. But it doesn't, that's all it is. It doesn't tell you what a SCAT team is. It doesn't tell you what a SCAT team does. It says ensure SCAT missions are conducted. But what are SCAT missions? Well, we have recon surveys. We've got shoreline cleanup assessment surveys. We've got monitoring surveys. We've got inspection surveys. We have beach profiling surveys. We've got SCAT Ops Liaison assignments. I mean, off the top of my head, there's at least 6 different types of SCAT missions that can be assigned. It does say develop STRs, but it doesn't define, it says above, consult to ensure that SCAT activities and shoreline treatment recommendations support best management practices. Well, what is an STR? It's something that we invented. We invented that on the Salandang Island. We invented the STR form, and we invented the shoreline or the STR inspection report form, which provides closure. So we have the initial surveys to reconnaissance or ground surveys to define and delimit, but it doesn't tell you how to finish in the manual. And so we developed on Selendang the idea of having the same SCAT team with interagency representation. When ops said, we think we're done, we'll go out with our interagency team and the original STR form, which has the target for operations, the treatment targets, and we'll do an inspection. And if that zone or that section of shoreline meets those criteria, then it gets signed off by the SCAT team. And then that goes back into environmental unit. And we can then say, if it does pass those criteria, so again, another act, we say NFT, no further treatment. If no further treatment is required, then we can tick that segment as being off the operations list. So an important role is that progressively, all of these STRs, the work assignments in the 204, progressively each individual one has its own STR inspection report form that recommends no further treatment. That's how we know when to turn the lights off. When the last one of those STRs has reached an NFT status, then the operation is completed. And on Selendang, that was a year and a half later.
Well, working out of Dutch Harbor, actually, it was the far side of Unimak Island, right?
Yep.
Right. I wouldn't have been able to turn the lights off fast enough.
Oh, that was a beautiful place to work out of. You know why? It was so isolated. There was a fixed number of people that could be there, and so we didn't have this constant coming and going of people just out of interest. You couldn't get to Dutch just because you thought it might be interesting. And so the people that were there were the people that were actioning. These are all the action people. There were very few people just happened to be there, or, oh, let's go take a look type people, you know. And as a result, it was certainly, I think, one of the most efficient response operations I've been involved in, because the numbers of people weren't that great.
It just goes to show you that these 400-person command posts that we routinely end up seeing do not necessarily represent efficiency.
Correct. There's often a desire to make sure that everybody's involved. And I mean, I think one thing that maybe will come out of this past year is that the ability to engage with people as we're doing remotely. However, that's which may reduce the number of people in the command post. But the one thing that we're lacking right now, and right from the get-go, the first drill that I was on, COVID type drill, is that you can't go over as a shoreline person looking at strategies and tactics. You can't go over and eavesdrop on what ops are doing. Not, you know, it's just like, how do you get this information when you're in the way it's structured right now? We're segregated into our different virtual rooms, and unless we can multitask and probably have different screens to see what multiple things are going on, we can't eavesdrop on a lot of things that are happening, and that's a loss of communication. Now on drills and exercises which are focused on meeting certain criteria, that's it doesn't really harm anything. But on a real spill, if you can't go over and sit down with the ops section chief or the shoreline branch supervisor and just talk about things, then you miss understanding their rhythm and what they're thinking and getting their feedback directly, because they're the ones that have to go out and do the work and implement the program. So yeah,
this remote drilling and exercising, and to to some extent responding, people learn quite quickly that, oh, my one little laptop with its screen is not enough.
Right.
I've controlled a bunch of big exercises during COVID, and I've done it off of multiple screens, even multiple computers, logged into the same Teams account multiple times with one earbud attached to one computer in one room, and a different set of earbuds, one of those earbuds in the other ear, so that I could literally be in two places at once. But that is an outlay of hardware and real estate that you have to be willing to commit to, and it makes a difference. Let's back up for a second. You said that you really needed to see an objective on the 202. How would you word that objective? If you were looking for unified command to establish an objective that you could work from, what would it say?
It would say, if the shoreline has been oiled or is at risk of being oiled, activate a shoreline response program and a SCAT program to minimize shoreline impacts.
Okay, I'm writing it down because I might need it.
Well, I mean, no one's asked that question before, so I think it's a good question, and it is good. You know, I don't like to have, and I've been on drills where, you know, you're presented with a set of pre-worded objectives and you just tick them off. I think I would prefer if the incident command team, the command staff, could think of them from themselves. So I would say, you know, conduct surveys of impacted shorelines, but something in there that recognizes that shorelines are a priority, so that when you put a 213 resource request in, whoever's in the resource unit, if they wanted to, could go and look at those incident objectives and say, wow, this is right up there. This is one of the first priorities. And so I'm going to assign a priority to the resource request that is equal to the other identified objectives. So, and I think, go back, you know, where you say you're on water playing with your equipment and stuff, a shoreline response program is not instead of the on-water operations. It's concurrent. It's at the same time. It's just that the resources tend to get sucked into the offshore right away. So I mean, I went down to deep water and I sort of went to the air branch. I'd like a helicopter, please. And the guy sort of, why? Well, I wanted to do some shoreline surveys. And the guy goes, well, I don't know, just put your name on the list. And I said, okay, actually, just if I could rephrase this, I probably need 6 helicopters for about 6 months. He looked at me, but at that moment, he said, either this guy's really stupid or he means it. And fortunately, he didn't think that I was stupid. It took a while to organize, but we did get those helicopters. We did get the support that we needed for all those. I mean, flying from Homer down to the Louisiana coast as opposed to a 4-hour drive each way to get down to Venice. I mean, so that objective is pretty important because other people, such as a resource unit, then they can recognize the importance of what's being done.
Well, it certainly helps you get what you need onto a 215.
Yeah.
So that's really the first role of the unified command in this process, is to establish an appropriate objective that allows this process to go forward with the sense of urgency that it deserves. That's, I think, a very good way of phrasing it. Yeah, the sense of urgency that it deserves is it's missing, and it misses it. It's not in drills and exercises. Let me rephrase it. It rarely is.
a couple of oil companies recognize the importance of a shoreline response program, and they will probably have that as an objective. But I think, generally speaking, most organizations that put on a drill or exercise, it is not one of their first objectives.
Well, we know that here in Washington, there's almost no location where you're going to have a spill that there won't be shoreline impacts half an hour later. I mean, it's not going to take, in Deepwater Horizon, with the spill many miles offshore, it took, I can't put an exact number on it, but it was over 30 days before the first oil came on shore. Maybe it was longer than that. Can you tell? Do you remember how long it was before we had the
May the 5th, May the 6th, the night of.
Right. So we had a while. But I just did, my worst case drill where we simulated a tank vessel spill that originated in Rosario Strait. And I guarantee you that oil was on the shore of Lummi Island, Clark Island, Orcas Island within a half an hour, within an hour at the most.
Exactly.
Right. And it would have been on these rocky shores and sandy, cobbled inlets, and it would have been all over the place.
Yeah. And then Ecology, I can't remember how many years ago, did a study of what it would take to mobilize a shoreline response program. Didn't call it that, but a shoreline operation of a significant size. And when you've got 100 or so plus kilometers of oiled shoreline, which could likely happen from a large release, it's staggering what you would need in terms of people and logistics, infrastructure support, particularly because a lot of our coasts don't have land access. You're talking about water access, water logistics support, and then waste management. It very quickly escalates to something that is of major proportions. I mean, we're very fortunate not to have had large spills. I mean, when was the largest one? Chevron Richmond, a bunch of years ago. Christmas. I can't remember how long ago now.
That was the Foss barge, right?
Yeah.
We had that Foss barge. We had Delco Passage in Tacoma, but that was still only, well, I don't think anybody knows exactly how much, but I think the official number is somewhere in the 1,000-gallon range. It wasn't even very large, and it still lasted for quite some time.
Oh, yes.
Arco Anchorage in Port Angeles.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a big. But that was largely contained inside
inside Edith's Hook.
Yeah, inside the bay.
Yeah. My first was in Ferndale at that point, at the Ferndale refinery. At that time, it was operated by Tosco, and they had, I think it was 400, maybe it was 400 barrels. It might have been 400. I mean, I was just driving a boom boat at the time. My very first spill. I'd worked for Clean Sound Cooperative for like a month and a half.
Yeah.
Right. And the cleanup on water cleanup operations, they only lasted about 24 hours.
Yeah.
But we started up in Ferndale at 2:00 in the morning, and we ended up south of Lummi Island by the time the day was out.
Right.
And with our cargo hold chock-a-block full of eelgrass, among other things.
Yeah. How do you imagine?
Oh, it was a mess.
Yeah.
All our Marco belts and dip belts were all clogged with eelgrass.
Right.
But we haven't had anything close to a worst case yet in Washington, knock on wood.
No, it's we always say it's bound to happen. Well, hopefully it's not bound to happen if everybody's careful. and things are getting a lot better these days. So
They are getting better. Let's talk about some things that are a little less command posty and a little more tactical. You've been working with dogs.
Yeah,
To do SCAT work, which I think is really cool. Tell us, what can a dog do, and how do you train them, and when did you first do it?
Well, I'll tell you what a dog can do. Dog can, we've done systematic field trials, carefully controlled field trials. The last ones we did just before the COVID clampdown, February of last year, we had weathered oil targets placed 5 meters, 15 feet below surface. And the dogs found them all. We had 5 oil types ranging from a dilbit to a bunker C, weathered Macondo, semi-solid Macondo, and tar balls from the Texas Gulf Coast. We put them at the base of 5 meter, 15-foot long pipes in the ground. And the dogs found them pretty much instantaneously. In fact, the first alerts were over 100 feet away. The dog started moving towards, had picked up the aroma 100 feet away. They can find subsurface oil. They can quickly find it and then delineate it. They can find weathered oil. Well, fresh oil is easy peasy, but weathered oil we were not so sure about. So the 2 main uses for a dog, and they're quick. We used them in North Saskatchewan River. We used them for months on. We had 4 dog teams, 4 canine SCAT teams. They were part of the SCAT team, and they surveyed, over 1,000 kilometers of oiled riverbank at 8,000 hits, 8,500 hits that were verified by the SCAT teams themselves. We've had them up in Prince William Sound with Scott Pagot out of Cordova. We found sequestered oil. It's been there since 1989. Deeply buried oil. So we've got experience with them. We've got a project going on right now with Texas General Land Office to ascertain if they can distinguish between background tar balls, which are very common on the Gulf Coast, and oil from a particular incident. In other words, can they discriminate? We sort of know they can. We've done it informally, but now we've got a systematic program.
So how do you train a dog on the fly to distinguish between this background oil and just like, here's the oil we just spilled?
Yeah. It's a reward basis. I mean, we've taught dogs to ignore oil concentrations less than a certain threshold, because that was a concern. Okay, a dog can find something in parts per million, actually parts
billion,
per
right?
billion.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We proved that in the lab. In fact, the dog, our instrumentation wouldn't go any lower, and the dogs were still reacting. So, but we don't clean up down to parts per million, parts per billion. So we had a test with American Petroleum Institute, again part of the last year's program, to train a dog to only react at a certain concentration, so that he wouldn't just pick up every single piece of small amounts. So we can train them on concentration to ignore low amounts. We can train them. We've already done this informally, as I say, but we've now got a field program that we're going to start this September on the Texas Gulf Coast to discriminate between different oil types. How easy is it? Training the dog's easy. A detection dog is just trained in a different manner to some other dogs, but I mean, it's no different than dogs that find cadavers, that find accelerants for arson, that find drugs. University of Washington uses them to find whale scat in the bays, from the deck of a boat. Teaching a dog to, I mean, dogs like to smell things.
Yeah, yes, they do.
So we work on their enjoyment, the reward. You see a dog that's found a target and he gets the treat. I mean, this is what it's all about. Dogs want to be happy, and we make them happy, and we use that motivation to find oil and find it in different concentrations and different types. Actually, it all started in Norway, in Arctic Norway, as part of one of the JIP programs, joint industry program, research program, where a chemist who had a pet long-haired dachshund. Okay, imagine a long-haired dachshund being used as a detection dog, and so Per Johan Brandvik is his name. He trained his dog to look for. He's a chemist. He's an oil spill chemist at Sintef. And he just thought it'd be interesting to see if he could train his dog to do that. And he took his dog up to Svalbard at about 80 degrees north in the high Arctic. And we had a shoreline experiment back then in 1998. And we had left some control plots. We had cleaned up some shorelines and we'd left some control plots. And he took his dog and he found those control plots, which were 2 feet or over 2 feet, 2.5 feet under the sediment. And that dog found them. And I visited him in Trondheim a couple of years later, and he showed me how the dogs worked. And then I was down at Klingolf, or I can't remember which year it was, 2003 or 4. And there was a chap there called Paul Bunker, who's ex-British Army, who had developed techniques for detecting mines and unexploded ordnance in Northern Ireland and in Bosnia. And so here's a man who had trained the detection canines and developed the protocols. So we were having a chat in the corridor. See, this is how things happen in the non-virtual world. You run into somebody in the corridor and you chat about something. And it's the old smile test. If you see a smile on the face for about 2 seconds, it's not a very good idea. But if you see someone smiling and nodding their head for 5 seconds, there's a little interest that's sparked there. Well, my head was nodding and my smile lasted about 10 minutes because I could just envisage taking this technology, the protocols that he developed for mines and unexploded ordnance to find an oil. And so Paul and I still work with Paul. He and I got together and put this proposal together for API, which was funded in 2015. And that was the first systematic field trials that we conducted. And we had, a guest and visitors program, and people from industry. Some of the oil companies showed up. PHMSA from Pipeline showed up. A couple of Coast Guards showed up. James Hanslick from Klingolf showed up. And you could see they all had the big smile and the 5-minute smile test, and they all walked away from that saying, wow. And so we've been fortunate to have a few, projects and a few spills since then. So,
I'll have to can up at 213 canine SCAT teams.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We call them canine SCAT teams. K, letter K, number 9. It's a separate mission in all these lists of SCAT's missions. But I tell you why they're important, Dan, because in deep water we dug at least 300,000 pits. And now the most any SCAT team can do in a day is about 100. Some, maybe a couple of hundred at the most. That's an amazing amount of effort, particularly when most of them don't have any oil in them. You're looking for it. Dogs can find that. You don't need to. A dog can do several kilometers in an hour. And when a dog gives you an alert, then you can dig a pit. So it's a triage. plus, and on every spill, about 60% of the SCAT survey mileage is records no observed oil. That's a hell of a lot of effort to just clear an area. The dog can clear that at 5 miles an hour, whereas we, walking, are not as quick, and we get tired more quickly, or we sit on an ATV and we do a rush job. Dog can, we call it quartering, a dog can zigzag, 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 and cover a tremendous amount of territory with a very high level of confidence and a low risk that there's no oil there. So clearing then gets rid of that burden we have of having to do it manually, as a pedestrian or on an ATV. And those SCAT teams can then spend their time better elsewhere, like doing SCAT ops liaison. So where there's subsurface oil, they're definitely going to find it quicker than any field team can do, and they're going to clear areas faster than any field team can do. So there's two immediate huge advantages in terms of manpower and effort that they're a game changer. They really are, even for those low level types of activities, because they free up the sort of the high priced help, if you like, to go and do work elsewhere.
Well, I look forward to talking to you more about those when I see you in person at Clean Pacific. Yeah. How about drones?
Well, we use those. They're as we get fewer restrictions, they can be used more frequently. That's the only limitation right there, is the line of sight issue. We use them up in the North Saskatchewan River, where you've got like places like mud flats and wetlands where, we have to tromp through there or up to our ankles, knees, waist, sometimes in mud. It's slow going, it's hard work just to clear an area of having no oil. So we had drones and dogs in the North Saskatchewan River spill. The drones were great because you could real time do that quick triage to look for the large concentrations of oil and find them in some of the back bays and the nooks and the crannies. And I think they don't really need a SCAT person. I mean, it's quite easy to train and calibrate a drone operator, a pilot, or somebody who's working with the pilot, because we're looking for the bulk oil, and it's usually big and black or big and brown. And right at the beginning of a spill, when drones can be really useful, they can find those heavy concentrations. They would have been great on Costco Busan because it was foggy for the first 3 days or 2 days, and we couldn't get up in the air to look for those concentrations. Whereas a drone, if that could have been deployed, we would have more quickly found those bulk oil concentrations and would have been able to remove those before they got redistributed. So dogs and drones, they're great toys, but they are also not toys. They are also very serious new tools that really improve our capabilities and our efficiencies.
Yeah, we very successfully used the drone for the first time in response, at least my first time in response, during the Aleutian Falcon fire in Tacoma just a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was a great tool. I've talked about that already on the podcast, so I won't reiterate, but an awesome tool. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was, because this is kind of the topic of the day, subsea SCAT.
Yeah.
Non-floating oil is the big topic. We're going to have a seminar about it next week. Clean Rivers, the MFSA is hosting a seminar. Everybody's been required to update their response plans to show how they're going to deal with it. And I hear there's a subsea SCAT manual, which I've never seen, but that is in existence. Tell me about subsea SCAT.
Well, yeah, it's called USCAT.
Oh, USCAT. Okay.
And I didn't come up with that one, but there is a USCAT manual. There's also API have a subsurface oil detection manual as well that was put together 3 or 4 years ago. And so we've looked at the manuals, and we've looked at, we have developed these manuals that help us, and you can see the limitations. And that's, I think, when you think of underwater oil, subwater surface oil, it's the limitations that are the real issues. And I'm going to just say that we have shown, and we have a Bessie U.S. Naval Research Lab project underway right now. We're using dogs to find oil on a lake bed. It's already done it.
On the lake bed, what's the depth?
10, 15 feet. That's all we're doing. I mean, we're just going through proof of concept right now. But just as the University of Washington use dogs to find whale scat, we have used dogs already in Saskatchewan in the river. We weren't looking for it, but they have detected oil that's in up to 10 feet of water that we know of.
And they're doing it from the deck of a boat? They're on the boat,
Yeah.
You're driving in the river, or
that's what we're doing right now down in the Texas lake.
Okay.
Yeah. We have underwater targets that are sealed and will only allow the light end molecules through, so there's no oiling. So the oil's in the target, and the dog is alerting onto the airborne molecules that go up through the water column.
So a little toluene, xylene.
Yeah. Well, even higher stuff than that. We're using weathered West Texas crude, so a lot of the light ends are gone already. We're going to try them with tar balls pretty soon as well. So the trouble with underwater scat is that it's just this ability to see, you can't see it very well. And so all of the tools that we've been using so far are either been some type of electronic signal, which have pluses and minuses, or underwater videos and things like that, which also have, everything has a plus and a minus. Dogs have pluses and minuses, but the trick is to, I think, go through the USCAT manual, go through the API subsurface oil detection manual. There's a lot of work been done already, and I would say my opinion is, as helpful as it is, these manuals are, it's still a very difficult job, but it can be done.
Fascinating. When are we going to be able to hear you speak next? Are you presenting at Clean Pacific?
Yeah, yes, on dogs.
On dogs. Well, then I'll get to see it with slides.
Yeah, well, we've got a website with some videos on, but we haven't. Funnily enough, all this free time apparently that we've had over the past year, we have not managed to do as many of the things that we wanted to do. So, but
I managed to start a podcast.
Well, I've got Walking the Shores with Ed, if you've ever seen that.
I have it.
All without any break, Walking the Shore with Ed.
And is it YouTube, or is it?
It's a web. It'll take you to a website, and I've only done about 11 of them so far. Just walking out of my office down to the beaches of Bainbridge Island and talking about different things.
Okay, www. Walking the Shores with Ed.
Without the S. Look on my on the email I sent you. It's at the bottom there.
Okay, I will. I'm gonna go check it out.
There's the best one is the one where I'm playing with a football on the beach. So.
Okay, we'll check it out. And everybody else listening to the podcast, go check out www. Walking the Shore with Ed. If somebody wants to come contact you for support with SCAT or shoreline cleanup, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Ed at owenscoastal.com.
.com. Well, Dr. Ed Owens, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I really appreciate it.
Dan, I enjoyed it, and I really appreciate the questions, because I think your perspective is a different one than mine, and I hope I've been able to provide you with some of the answers to those questions.
You have. It's been very helpful. I'm going to share it with all of my incident commanders. Maybe we're taking a step towards making sure that shoreline cleanup is begun early and aggressively.
Thank you for joining myself and Dr. Owens for the tactics meeting. If you enjoyed the program, please send a link to a colleague or a friend. Next week, we'll have Dr. Tom Coolbaugh from OMSET, formerly of ExxonMobil, who's going to talk to us about the properties of petroleum hydrocarbons. Until next time.